Freedom, the state of being unbound from a particular force or thing, internal or external. Do you follow the manicured path with minimal deviation, like a good little object? Or do you take yourself as the subject, blazing your own trail into the shifty, overgrown shrubbery, having the world around you burn in the process? This is the main philosophy behind Deltarune's Weird Root. With the poetics thoroughly waxed, my name is Sichuan the Spicy Lad, and now that I've covered chapters 3 and 4 broadly in my recent videos, it's time to not only get into the nitty, but also the gritty. The Forbidden Path, officially called the Weird Root, called as such because of its deviation from the normal path, as well as how Chris and Noelle view themselves in relation to each other and the rest of the world. Some call this the Snowgrave Route. I find this to be reductive on the other hand, and prioritizes aesthetics over meaning, so I strongly discourage its use. Deltarune's got a cornucopia of bizarre, head-scratching mysteries going on with it. Much to the fans' enthusiasm, chapters 3 and 4 develops and makes more apparent that they are much more tightly knit together than we've observed prior, this Forsaken Route possibly being the linchpin to them functioning as such a system, even if we don't know exactly what it all means yet. So today, I volunteered to explain what may be going on with the Weird Route, theorizing what the elements of it may mean and how they fit together, and doing my best to propose how they might progress in the future. While not all of my major thoughts on this subject are that original, I'm synthesizing all of this in a way that I've not seen anyone else actually articulate or actively point out. Many concepts I include here in this dissertation may likewise be familiar to y'all because of this, but I aim to compose and deliver them in a way that I bet most haven't really thought of before. What I won't be doing is recapping the Weird Route as you might anticipate, nor its annex of the Sword Route and so on. This video is for people who are already well acquainted with the game. Elaboration and presentation of evidence will happen here, but there will be little retread. Moreover, while understanding this route and surrounding elements is largely predicated on the following entities, I will not be focusing on Eram or Friend as characters, much less all the rest of them. They'll all be given their practical importance here, but not much more. Another video will be when they get their respective times to shine. Or dim. All that being said, let us get into it. I'd first like to get into the Sword Route since it's probably the most abstract part of the whole shebang, yet is also the main route in its most condensed form. It's essentially a microcosm of the main route it's demonstrating. It pushes both the player and Chris into having their way with the world, though much to the latter's shame. Similarly to the main Weird Route, it is not part of the current prophecies such that Rousey, much to his horror, has no concept of the Northern Light Island, where the White Cloak and Eram reside, and the Mike Zone to a lesser extent. There is that bit from Gerson about the island, but we'll get to that, we'll get to it. By the end, it's shown there was never such a concrete boundary between this game and the marginally more real game just outside of it, as Hero's sword ascends into a higher plane of existence, just as Chris can descend into the Hero's. If you've been paying attention to this whole sequence, you'd notice the meta-commentary dripping from the screen. Yes, this appears to be the same phenomenon as Chapter 3's Man Room, and Chapter 4's to a lesser extent. A lot of this should be familiar to those who have done Chapter 2 and Undertale, but there are parts that are still without a mirror as of yet, such as needing to kill 8-bit Susie and Rousey to gain LV or otherwise progress, or Noelle and Chris being used up. As such, it looks like what remains are hints to how things will progress in Chapter 5 and onward, especially that shelter part. Rather large asset in how the Sword Route presents itself, and to be honest a lot of Chapter 3, is the involvement of number 1 rated salesman 1997. Just as simulated in Mantle, Spamton is a major pillar of the Weird Route even being possible. The weapons, the locales, the obsession over freedom and heaven, the elephant-sized cat in the room. To keep this from being too lengthy and breaking one of my rules, as I still want to make another video on these two, just as I and others have argued Friend to be the real Mike since before Chapter 3, we have only gotten louder and stronger about this, now with Eram also in the mix. I talked about this in the third part of my Chapter 4 overview if you want some more about that elaborated now, but for now let's just keep on topic. From where I'm standing, I'd say it's backstage where the deal had gone wrong, exposing the lovable salesman to man-made horrors beyond his comprehension. If Spamton wished to claw his purposefully crumbling success back, and growing ever higher to potentially escape his reality, he was to take an offer he couldn't refuse. He was to assist the player and Chris in gaining freedom. In other words, giving a dedicated Weird Route goer the Thorn Ring, something he thinks he can avoid in the normal route, believing he and Chris don't need Mike at that point, though not forgetting what he's learned about the process. But if we so will it, we will go with the original plan, and Spamton knows it won't end well for anyone. Just as he lost everything by trying to see too far, so will Chris, should we proceed. And to think, If Tenna hadn't been so pushy, or if he'd received Spamton's pleas about his situation, this could have all been avoided. You win again, doomed Yowie. You win again. Since there's so much of a spotlight on the Pale Addison in this route, as if the other official works in fandom at large don't give him enough, why is Spamton put on this dark pedestal in universe? Why does Spamton get special weird root treatment where the likes of Jevil and Gerson do not? That's the neat part. He doesn't. Okay, not entirely true, but hear me out. Hidden battles, shadow crystals, meta knowledge, freedom. That's all here for these characters and for the weird root. So how does Spamton differ then? I think it's all about two key traits in how he reacted to Gaster's intervention and Eram and Friend subsequently carrying out the dirty work. Jevil lost all he had since Gaster showed the nature of the universe as a game, but felt no desire to change anything for the better, since he was then already free in his own eyes. Gerson already knew all about his universe being narrative-driven, advocating for others to diverge from the prophecy when given the chance, exercising freedom where possible. Thus, he had no interest in potentially sacrificing his sanity in seeking any deeper knowledge on the subject that Gaster could provide him, losing nothing. Gaster wanted someone who would both be burdened by the forbidden meta-knowledge and try to manifest a different fate by any means necessary, both through and because of it. That is where Spamton fits in. He's the only one to be broken and desperate out of these three, and having a heart full of spite certainly helps too. Although there is a different way to look at this, which is now backed up by the December newsletter. Not the last time you'll hear me say that, just to let you know. It could alternatively be that Gaster initially gave Jevil and Spamton enough insight to intrigue and to be of use to them, and once they began telling others about it, and the source of the information, that's when the madness and further comprehension was set to poison them after one more interaction, with the rest of the previous interpretation convening from there. In this case, perhaps it's more sort of a test by Gaster to see if they're trying to spread the word, not unlike a rumor about video game secrets, glitches, or theories. This especially left Spamton too afraid or even unable to tell Chris or the player too much. Whatever the case, Mike knew exactly what would happen to Spamton, but y'all didn't need me to tell you that at this point, right? Perhaps it's not quite enough to propose the process. How about I explain how the secret bosses fit into this theory of mine on a more personal level, well, barring Eram. I think they're rather self-evident. Beginning with Jevil, what is his course of action when he learned of the world and future events? He went on a rampage. Chaos and violence were what he now knew freedom to be. He tries to off the fun gang the moment he gets his chance. And among his warnings after his defeat, he drops some subtle foreshadowing of what might be Eram, though this part is debatable. But if you try to equip the Devil's Knife to Noelle, it will smile for her, and only her, so maybe this sort of thinking isn't so crazy after all. We know Sham learned a lot from Jevil, including the Shadow Crystals and other Gaster shenanigans presumably, but that doesn't really explain them knowing how to work with the crystals, much less how or where they got the shell mantle originally. Well, guess that makes two cats I need to make videos on. For Gerson, it actually gets more interesting, and look out, this is a long one. The tortoise's advocacy for reinterpreting or even going against the prophecy is obvious, so no elaboration needed there. His secret boss quest, while not immediately obvious in its meaning, does still appear to hold some meaning for Titans, Forgotten Man, Dr. Five's own secret boss from the looks of it, and okay, I don't really know what's up with the organic maze. Does anyone have any suggestions for that? All this pales in comparison to the actual Hammer of Justice fight though. Back in my Chapter 4 overview, I pointed out how Gerson, while still alive, wrote Lord of the Hammer's third chapter to focus on the island that the Ice Palace is held on. If it wasn't in the prophecy, and he seemingly never spoke to any of the usual ne'er-do-wells, how did he know about it? Prior to recently, that's where this mystery stood, but now I realize that it gets yet thicker than I gave it credit for. Take a look at the first 4 described chapters of Lord of the Hammer compared to our current 4 chapters of Deltarune. Notice anything strange about each of them? Well, let me help. Yep. 3 of them are centered around the weird root, secret bosses, or both, and the first is about Susie supposedly being no more than a major boss that you just progress past. That is not what the prophecy goes on about, at least how it's presented to us. In fact, this is all very sacrilegious. One might even say, forbidden. If I am correct in reading these, what's going to cause the jealous wildfire in Flower King? Oh goodness. Possible regicide and environmental terrorism aside, I'll close this segment with a couple more thoughts on Gerson. There's a good chance that he did know from something or someone about the role that he may one day play in Death. Just look at the classroom he taught in before he kicked the bucket and what Alvin was going on about. And the Sound of Justice fight might play into the violence part of the weird route that Gerson himself wouldn't fulfill, but that might cause too much of a tangent right now, so just keep that in mind, interpret that as you would. So, what am I trying to say? Am I suggesting that Gaster purposefully devised a secret avenue by which his test subjects, the players, can revolt against the narrative he's so passionately created for us? Yes. I genuinely think this is part of his plan, to see how curious and how far we can take the game, not just following the path of least resistance. Doesn't explain where the first prophecy came from or how the new one came to be, but regardless, that's what I think is going on here. I know there's recently been debate on if Gaster had a direct hand in the normal secret bosses, or if he did just sick his little henchmen on these guys wholesale. Well, I was going to explain how this would actually work, going into the logistics and secret boss designs, but Toby kinda beat me to the punch with the new Mike cutscene with the December newsletter. Anyway, it was only Spamton that got the advanced treatment so far, hence his weird root importance and his friend-like dealmaker, of which neither of the others have anything like. If you need any firm signs on Gaster's hand in the weird root being true, he really wants us to go against the odds to achieve that coveted victory against the Knight, who, like the darkly enlightened men we've spoke of so far, drops a shadow crystal upon their defeat and is closely associated with the Doctor, Eram, and Friend anyway, to the point of having many a Gasterism about them, down to their talk sound being derived from the Gygas noise in another hymn. Hell, Gaster even tells you if you don't have the Shadow Mantle. He knows full well about how to get it and who provides it, but still encourages its collection nonetheless. Also, probably most interestingly is something that I've not heard enough people talk about, and there's even a misconception regarding it for those who have. The version of Northern Light that plays when formally meeting Eram for the first time in the Ice Palace is slowed down to, and I'm being serious, 66.6%. I think this all spells it out rather eloquently, don't y'all think? That was quite a lot of demon symbolism, so how about the opposite? As of Chapter 4, I think it's pretty clear that the angel and the player are the same entity, though this still leaves Noelle and her growing stockpile of angel theming high and dry if just left at that. I'm now just realizing I barely mentioned Noelle throughout this essay so far, about a root that has her as the cornerstone. So yeah, why does Noelle have so bloody much to do with the angel, even though we're probably the angel? Well, I think that kind of answers its own question, or at least it does now. We're nurturing Little Miss Holiday into being a living weapon, a secondary avatar, or maybe tertiary, for our own will to blaze back an otherwise obscured, dilapidated trail. But in order to break the game, we must break her first. Noelle's growing weak, yet getting stronger. Killing streaks don't matter to a monster. A popular theory regarding this is that Noelle is not only falling deeper into a compliant trance, that much is obvious, but also this red dot may be either an existing piece of the soul or a budding copy of it, growing into a permanent, immediate vector for our control over her. It's so vital to the root that it changes the ending of the chapter for Pete and BB's sake. Sorry Noelle, freedom isn't free, and it's going to cost you your soul one way or another. Moreover, depending on how literal the sword route should be taken, Noelle is going to be used up at some point, which could mean something like her becoming a husk of her former self, or maybe she tragically dies to advance this infernal thread, or maybe we completely subsume her and, well, you know what happens when a human soul gets into a monster. But regardless, is that how we eventually get the Thorn Ring back to make the Twisted Sword? Of course, we need to be patient to see what Chapter 5's Weird Root holds, as the only confirmed parts here are Noelle's unnatural eagerness to be our partner in the festival, and the fragment of H.OGG in the Deltarune site. Still don't know what that new mailing list is for, though. In order to put a nice little ribbon on the angel and devil motifs in regards to the Weird Root, look back to the songs Dump and Sword. Both of these have major parts of them being taken from the Holy, the melody and bass respectively. The fountains naturally lead to the Titans, as does Eram and Friend, and all the weirdness going on with them, as presumably culminating into the angel's heaven. All roads lead to the angel, and Gaster, of course, so it surely seems to me that the creation of a new world or narrative, and inversely accessing a higher reality may be major themes going on here, or at least vital connective tissue. Even more interestingly is the Titans. The angel wings and save point visuals make themselves quite clear, and secondarily there's the somewhat tenuous gastro resemblance. Squint your eyes, you can see it, including the hands. Beyond those details, Titans are said to be manifestations of the fear of the unknown, intrusive thoughts, and knowing no mercy. Unlike our relationship with Chris is in the Weirdroot itself. Irem also fits quite well into this, being a nightmare, as we see in its name and its files, that encourages our power trip over the world, and the water and crossed eye motifs are quite apt too. As usual with Eram, the night tags along in yet more connection to the very topic, displaying a very similar design and properties to actual Titans, and craving power and despair. Since these two are actual characters with seeming physical forms, instead of just mindless killing machines, they're not exactly like true Titans, but the apparent essentials of the connections leave little to the imagination, and it appropriately connects back to Chris yet again for both entities. Isn't that just as interesting as it is sickening? If I may, there's another piece of evidence for this, which also plays back into the greater topic of the Weirdroot and secret bosses. Did anyone notice that this Titan spawn here kind of looks like Spamton? There's another connection for you. This one over here also looks familiar. It's kind of like... oh dear. The future of the Weirdroot. That's something I've had on my mind since seeing Chapter 4's unique ending. I can scarcely imagine what 6 and 7 might bring up, so not really going to be focusing on them, besides doing away with dead weight. Yuck. But I do have a decent idea for a major aspect of Chapter 5. There is the festival being held and all, which H.ODG likely pertains to. Expect plenty of concerning interactions with Noelle here, and maybe another step forward, judging by how the other sound files of this particular motif are like. And I was originally going to take this part out, but just as I was adjusting the script, Toby put out the newsletter, which contained this godforsaken line right at the beginning. Looks like that one unused snow prophecy is gonna come true in Chapter 5's Weirdroot, presumably being cut because of its strictly optional nature. Maybe in Hometown, specifically once H.OGG plays, it'll conspicuously start snowing. Why did the rain stop? Nah, why did the snow start? Everyone say, thank you Toby for delaying the video. But seriously, thank you for the newsletter, Toby. One of the main course, though, with all the importance and gravity placed on the Thorn Ring, being a necessary item for the Forbidden Path's completion in Chapter 2 and Chapter 4 onward, I've not heard a single person ever pop the question, where in the world did this thorn come from? Or should I ask, what world did this thorn come from? Flower King. It has to be Flower King, as if we had enough reason to fear the colors pink and yellow. This colorful heptad of blossoms is the centerpiece of Flower King, and is possibly the source of the weapon, only appropriate for them to be what consummates a second doomed marriage. At least one of these wedding bouquet parts is filling some of the usual roles in this conspiracy, or even all of the roles. But which of the set? The obvious answer would be the golden flower, as it takes the place of the red soul and, Flowey. Azrael reincarnation, meta-aware, become stronger, the works. All the better with the ghastly devices he's associated with, including that ominous red crack. Despite that seeming like a perfect fit, it is, there is one teaser of a flower darkener in Chapter 4, where Miss Mizzle, who's part of the Chapter 4 secret boss quest, and holds the Shadow Crystal related bitter tier item, drops info about her acquaintance, the Blue Flower, who she wishes for us to cross paths with. The two of them presumably meeting at Torlin Asgore's wedding back in the day. If this didn't mean anything, I would be very surprised. Although, despite blue being the sole color of integrity, Miss Mizzle says that the blue flower possesses exceptional kindness instead, which is green's attribute. Did Tony even play Undertale? Regardless of which of the 7 is Gaster's Sucker of the Day, if it's even just one of them, here's more or less what I think will go down, although admittedly I am kind of rambling here. This is largely hypothesis and conjecture in the form of glorified fanfiction. As of right now, here are my thoughts. 6 of the Sunflowers act as regular shopkeepers appointed by Asgore, judging by the newish song, leaving a single golden flower to be different from the rest. For some reason, every secret boss is either closely associated with a shopkeeper or has been the shopkeeper themselves, so I'm continuing that trend here. The golden flower, who I'm just going to represent with Petalii since that's pretty much perfect. You can swap that out for blue for Buttles if you want, but gold has more going for it as a boss. They're a toxically positive manipulator who wears a mask of friendliness and kindness, yet is actually apathetic or spiteful to a world that they now see as a sterile, fake, micromanaged garden, stripped of its edges by higher power, little more than astroturf. Perhaps more specifically, being a vizier for Asgore and maybe Toriel, depends on how her role is. Maybe we could fit a tea leaf analogy or a Roots reference in here somewhere. Through the course of the chapter, Petalii would take a liking to Chris, albeit being quite possessive of them, even lashing out at Susie and Rousey for daring to get involved with Dreamer family matters. More so with the latter, who they understandably view as a fake Azrael. That Rousey, always getting confused with flowers. This may also act as a reason for Petalii to give away one of their thorns to another pink and gold thing after learning how phony their universe is, in order to make the thorn ring. Maybe you could even call the entity of pink and yellow their best friend. This act of charity was done to ensure that Chris may grow stronger, eliminating any dead weight around them, and, in Petalii's eyes, making their fictional existence much more interesting, thusly gaining freedom from its confines. Petalii would view this as an expression of their favorite word, something they've always been associated with, but now has found new meaning for: love. The regular secret boss fight would be like the base form Flowey fight we never got, along with a strong focus on Rousey to balance out how chapters 2 through 4 did it, as well as the obvious thematic purposes. This may also be that shadow boss with the Death Scythe element that Spamton talked about, but on this occasion, let's not make a grave out of this rose if we can help it. On the other hand, in the weird route, jealousy may reach a whole new level with the addition of self-loathing, as Petalii learns exactly how the player and Chris use the thorn, gaining a soulmate, to in turn gain love. In the final hour or so of the Dark World, Petalii incites a blaze from the boss monsters, razing the field of pink and gold to the ground. If Petalii couldn't rewild the world to their liking, then they were going to burn it all down. This may culminate in the death of Asgore, and the birth of a new form of Petalii, the spiritual return of Omega Flowey, the new final boss. But whether you stomp a weed or smash a vine-covered television, you'll be able to get your 5th and final Shadow Crystal. Congratulations. There are definitely some kinks to iron out with this idea, but regardless, I can't wait to see how this actually plays out in-game this summer or thereabouts. What's going to be the major step forward in the story to transition to Chapter 6? Definitely something involving the shelter, simply due to Asgore's investigation and the logical progression of the story, but what else specifically? The Roaring Knight successfully kidnapping Toriel in the end? My identity reveal and Noelle getting more involved that way? More of Gaster personally revealing himself as a final tease? Will we hear the Ring of Heaven's call? Will we see the Tale of Hell take crawl? Fucking Jockington? I'm dying to know, but I do know that I'm not alone. If any of you want me to perhaps make a full outline of what I think Chapter 5 will entail, do tell me in the comments, or sign up for my Patreon for more direct requests. I think that would be fun. About what I said about the overly manicured garden, though. The concept of the original game. This isn't a brand new concept that the fans only now are aware of. As I mentioned in my Susie video from the Chapter 2 era, the idea that Noelle in Universe originally took Susie's role as the monster hero was already out there. Not only did these 2 chapters give us much more ammo for this, but it further expands in ways I've never heard suggested before. The Sword Root of course embodying this the most, barely even subtext. Even the Forgotten Man seems to have a part in this, but oh god, that's a lot to unpack on its own. It seems like all specific mentions of Noelle have been either completely removed, obscured, or otherwise recontextualized. To explain the big ones, look here. It depicts the girl wielding a sword as well as finding love, with a heart on her chest. On the surface, there is not much out of the ordinary for Susie, since Gerson believes she's the source of hope and has her things going on with Noelle and arguably the rest of the fun gang. But then it might strike you as odd that she's carrying a sword. Susie doesn't use swords. Even stranger is that Rousey says that Susie is supposed to wear ribbons, which the Purple Dragon's adamantly against. On the contrary, there is another monster girl we know of who actually has a special, even nostalgic relationship with ribbons. Of course, that monster is Noelle.
But Sitquan, you dumb shit.
I hear you say it to me with the utmost respect.
Noelle doesn't use swords. She only uses rings. You stupid bird.
Well, my dear, naive sweetie, that would be incorrect in 2 regards. First, I am not a bird. Second, Noelle can use swords, as of Chapter 4. It's only 2 swords right now, and of course you can't equip them officially yet, as she's not back as a Darkworld party member at the time of this video, but she is programmed to have just a couple of specific blades. The first one is the Jingle Blade, which is just her pencil. The other is the Black Shard. That makes 2 Knight connections for Noelle through equipable items, among a few others. The point is, she can wield swords, and has a very interesting relationship with them. That twisted sword's looking scarier and scarier every day. This of course extends into the heart and love thing, but I venture a guess that I don't need to explain that at this point, right? And from this angle, we could further surmise that Chris's prophecy may also refer to the vessel, and Gralse wasn't supposed to reveal his appearance, at least not nearly this early. Even if Noelle being the original monster hero is somehow wrong, like any other speculation I share, be it originally from me or repackaged from others, I hope y'all understand where I'm coming from at least. There's something related to the secret bosses and more accurately the shadow bosses in general that I keep mentioning but not really explaining. The shadow crystals. If these invisible bits of glass have something to do with the weird root, as their interactions seem to suggest, why is Chris looking for them? ERAM itself calls attention to the fact that Chris has far-fetched goals for them, even if the process itself is begrudgingly satisfying. Given the themes of the secret bosses and the mantle game, is it their freedom? What does that look like if it's even true? Well, I think Chapter 4 gives us a good idea. The interactions with the crystals and the text of the prophecy panel specifically, especially with the final prophecy hall. It's also thanks to their piano songs that we know that Chris, all this time, has known what the prophecy entailed. I'll also say that I think Chris's main goal with finding the shadow bosses and claiming the shadow crystals is to subvert the prophecy in some way, though they are of little use, at least in their current state. Good thing we have 2 items on the way that appear to be helping with just that. The Twisted Sword and whatever Sham is cooking up. It does look like we need to purify the crystals first by an unnamed cat. Is this Sham? Is this friend? We don't know yet. Maybe only then would the words of the prophecy be warped enough for a different ending. Regardless, it seems like this is something of a crossroads. Do we allow the creation of Sham's item, or do we use but a single crystal for a more nefarious route, after our little snow angel has done what she could? But if there's any lingering doubt about my thought process here, think back to Chapter 2's weird route. Unlike in the normal route, Spamton Neo is a required fight, with no dialogue warning and mocking you for going down this path. And what do you get after sticking Noelle on him, thus ending the fight? 1 guaranteed shadow crystal from the weird route, as well as the thorn ring from earlier. Both components needed to make the twisted sword. Now that's what I call a 2-for-1 special. He can't keep getting away with this. Lastly, here's my dumping ground for what I couldn't form coherent thoughts on in the framework of this video. I really wanted to have a segment about the meaning behind the obvious general root connections, but that might spiral into a big tangent with few satisfying answers with what we have. With the numerous shared details, including the Goner's behavior in the Jenna route, maybe the original game was more like Undertale in this regard, as even Noelle seems to suggest from Dragon Blazers, but good golly, if I don't stop myself now, I'll get stuck in exactly what I wanted to avoid. Moving on to something more substantial, the Forgotten Man, as I've said, definitely has something to do with the weird root, as his exceptionally strange, sometimes contradictory correlations with the secret bosses, Gaster, Friend, and Weird Root show without confusion, not to mention Chris and the Holiday Sisters of course. It looks like Chris and Des following Friend to the shelter was what caused the events of the game to take hold, and the man seems to have to do with Chris's trauma about the event. But why does this specifically have to do with the weird root? Like with anything else, we can shout stuff like friend, Gaster, freedom, holiday, meta commentary, all we want. It doesn't really explain why this moment from 7 years ago caused it to be necessarily possible. But if that's the case, then the Forgotten Man wouldn't be flaking on us in this route, right? His existence was seemingly brought about through this too. I think I'm lost. Not where the forest would grow, just lost. I've already got an updated Forgotten Man video on the way, but more integrity to this part would be nice. Please, if anyone has any way to reconcile this, tell me below. And subscribe and support me on Patreon if that's not too much to ask. Okay, thanks. Thank y'all so much for watching again. I know we just got the most amount of Deltarune in one sitting that we're ever going to get, but I lick my lips at the mere thought of Chapter 5. I'm sure I'm not the only fan who's excited to physically and emotionally abuse a bunch of innocent townspeople in northeastern Massachusetts. I'm just a normal person. I hope y'all stick around for more, and Toby, if by some miracle you're watching this, if you don't name a future Noelle song Snow Angel, I will personally shake my head in mild disappointment and move on with my day. You can count on that.